attention that way for sure. Maybe. Good evening. This is a long chapter and difficult, not because of the text, not even because of the language, just because of the subject matter makes this one tough. It's different. On another subject, did anyone know the people whose car burnt down out here on 61 at the end of Buffalo Road yesterday? Oh, okay. Wow. Ellis needs to- Okay. I saw Elliot down there, but I wow. Mm, wow. Hmm. Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. I'm glad that they're all right though. Yeah. Yeah. A good deal. I'm glad they're all right. Chapter 13. I'm not actually going to read this one verse by verse. We had young children in the class at Perrytown, so I just kind of set the lesson up more as a paraphrase. Mainly, we're going to hit the high points and talk about how this fits in the Davidic narrative of 2 Samuel. And so, to start with, we're going to read these first three verses. We're going to pretty much get the cast of characters for the chapter. All right. So, and now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother. Jonadab was a very crafty man. All right, so just to kind of by the numbers, here's where we stand. We have Absalom. He's David's son. Absalom's mother is Maacah. You have Tamar, also David's daughter, who has the same mother as Absalom, Maacah. But then you have Amnon, who is also David's son, but whose mother is Ahinoam of Jezreel. And so those are the three siblings we're dealing with in this chapter. And then you have Jonadab, who is, well, he's their first cousin, is what it amounts to, David's brother's son. And so we have the three siblings, and then we have the cousin that'll get you in trouble, is what we have here. All right, so we're going to establish a little bit of a pecking order. We're going to go back earlier in the book to chapter 3 and kind of catch up to exactly Amnon and David's relationship to one another. Kind of a few details that are going to be necessary in understanding this chapter. There's a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. So obviously we're back far enough now when Saul is still pursuing David, but David is growing in stature and followers. Verse 2, sons were born to David at Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second, Chileab of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. All right, so what does that mean that Amnon is firstborn? Just what are some very real ramifications of that? Well, first of all, he gets firstborn inheritance, right? He gets 2 shares to all the other sons, 1, but he's also heir to the throne. That is significant to keep in mind. And we look at Absalom. He's the third son, which really, means not much at this point. But what we do see is that his grandfather is the king of Geshur. And that's going to come into play in chapter 13 as well. So there's just a couple details that'll kind of fill this text out for us a little bit. All right, so we have Amnon. He is sick in lust for Tamar. He's not in love with her. He just wants to be with her. That's the very point blank explanation for what's happening here. He wants to be with his half sister Tamar sexually. And so Jonadab sees his cousin Amnon. It's in the morning, and he looks at him, and he can tell that he is physically ill. He looks sick. That's how bad Amnon is at this point. And Amnon tells him that he's longing for his sister Tamar, and Jonadab helps him out with a scheme to get her along. You're going to play sick, and that's kind of the idea. You're going to play sick, Amnon, and then your father's going to come visit you, and you make a request to him. He'll grant it. Request Tamar come tend to you. And so that's exactly what it is. Amnon played sick. Daddy King David came visited him, and what can I do for you, son? Well, you send my sister Tamar to cook for me in my presence so that I can see. And David agreed. Okay, fair enough, easy. All right, she gets there, and Amnon sends everybody out of the house. He sends the guards out, sends servants out, just he and Tamar. No witnesses, anything like that. All right. At this point, Amnon forces himself upon her. Tamar makes a fourfold plea to her brother why he should not do this thing. And there's, I could actually probably spend our time on that plea, but rather than do that, what we're going to do is just make sure we understand why we have this in the narrative, how this fits into the Davidic narrative here. So, Amnon forces himself upon Tamar against her will. He rapes her. All right. Tamar now is faced with the idea of how she can regain honor at this point. And the only thing that can happen for her to regain honor is for Amnon to marry her. And that was one of the pleas, is that Amnon would go to David and ask for her. He said he would not withhold me from you. All right, it was her words. But as soon as the deed is done, Amnon really can't stand the sight of Tamar. They're still there, they're still in the house together, and he forces her out the door, locks it behind her. He's done with her. He does not want to look at her. All right, he looks at her and he sees his shame. Right. So she reacts, right, as we would expect. Now, being the king's daughter, and right now, as far as we are into 2 Samuel, we don't know of other daughters right now. We know of a few sons and just a few of their names, but not all of them. And we certainly don't know the daughters. The daughters, the unwed virgin daughters of the king, they wore specific clothes, something that set them apart from everybody else, that represented their royal status and also their purity. And so when she gets pushed out of the house and forced out, the first thing she does is, well, she understands that she's not worthy to wear those clothes anymore. She tears her clothes, she puts ashes on her head, and then, is crying, and she's mourning. It's exactly what she's doing. It's the same kind of scenario you would see for someone that's grieving, and that's exactly what she's doing. Well, it doesn't take long, because as soon as somebody sees her in the state that she's in, they understand what's happened. They may not know with whom that has happened, but they understand what has happened to Tamar. Absalom finds out what Amnon had done. He finds out from Tamar. He has her move into his household. He's taking care of her. Now, at this particular point, we sort of make the assumption that he's the big brother and she's the little sister. That seems to fit, and it's sort of how the text lines it out. He brings her into his household, and the text states that she lived there as a desolate woman. She has little way of regaining honor. She'll probably not be able to get a husband. We'll have to talk about her some more in the future, but for this chapter, she's living in Absalom's household, and her brother is taking care of her now. So as you can imagine, Absalom is not happy. Absalom is furious. He does not speak to Amnon, and it's interesting because he doesn't speak neither good nor evil to him. He doesn't go confront him. He doesn't speak at all. He comes across as apathetic or ambivalent. He just pretty much is like he ignores him, but it's not such a thing that draws attention. So that's a lot of self-control, if you will. 2 years passed. 2 years. We have a saying, what is it? A revenge is a dish best served what? Cold, right? 2 years Absalom waited, biding his time for the right opportunity, right? 2 years passed, and Absalom is up at Baal Hatzor, which is just a few miles north of Bethel. Not too far from Jerusalem at all. It's far enough away that Jerusalem can't peek over the hill and see what's happening at Baal Hatzor. Far enough away that the screams can't be heard or gunshots couldn't be heard, that kind of thing. It's just far enough in the distance to provide a little bit of seclusion. Absalom does something similar to his brother. He manipulates his dad. Now, we have this happen twice in this chapter. We have Amnon using his dad to get to his sister, right? Plays him the fool to get his sister to his house. Absalom does something likewise. He's going to be shearing these sheep at Baal Hatzor. He's going to throw a party. It's kind of a thing, when it's time to shear the sheep, bring everybody around. We're going to throw this party. We're going to be drinking. And he tells his men, he said, when Amnon gets drunk, whenever he's drunk, I'm going to issue the command. You attack now. And, okay, everybody's on board, and that's exactly what happened. Amnon drank until he was drunk. Absalom gave the order. They struck down Amnon. The other brothers, witnessing this, they hopped on their mules and fled back to Jerusalem. Now, during this time, you have to understand, if you are a son of the king and you got one son attacking a son, odds are pretty good he's coming after you, because that was a pretty standard act, especially once we get into, say, 2 Kings, when all the monarch's sons were fighting amongst one another, vying for the throne. So a son jumps up and strikes down one of his brothers, the other brothers are put on notice. This dude is trying to get to the throne, and he's willing to wipe out all of his brothers to get there. So his brothers hop on their mules, and they flee, head back towards Jerusalem. Somehow or another, it must have been somebody on a faster mule, gets back to David and spreads word to him that Absalom has struck down all of his sons. Not just Amnon, but that all of his sons have been killed at the hand of Absalom. And David tears his clothes and he hits the ground, right? He's mourning. He believes that all of his sons have died, right? Save Absalom. And good old Jonabed is there, the cousin, right? He's like, well, wait a minute. Jonadab says, David, king, uncle, only Amnon was killed because Absalom's been determined since the day that he violated his sister to bring about this revenge. Like, Jonabed was kind of in the know. David is ignorant. And you read this and you're thinking, you know what, if I'm David, I would have said something like, this would have been pretty good information to have 2 days ago, right? Before. Why am I just now hearing? But David doesn't. David's sort of in the dark. He's been used by a couple of his sons, manipulated by a couple of his children now. And his firstborn is now dead. Absalom fled to Geshur. We know why. Because Grandpa sits on the throne there. Geshur is just east of the Sea of Galilee. It's not far. It's, Ammon is kind of off the edge of the Sea of Galilee. Well, Geshur is kind of wedged right in there between it. This is one of those political alliance weddings David made, right? He's securing support in the Transjordan, so he marries the daughter of the king of Geshur, Maacah, and has children with her, Absalom and Tamar. But Absalom flees to Pephal's house. It's where he's going to go for asylum. And David mourned. He mourns the loss of his son Amnon. Absalom lived at Geshur 3 years. The text says David longed for his son. So he mourned for Amnon, but then he longed for Absalom to come back home. We thought we had family problems, right? This is where it gets interesting. Back in chapter 7, the author shares with us the Davidic covenant. God makes a covenant with David. You're going to have a man on the throne so long as you obey my will. The Messiah is going to come. He's coming through your lineage. You're going to have an eternal throne. You'll never lack a man on the throne. All these good things, right? And then we get to chapter 12, 11, and David sins with Bathsheba. All right? You get the curse. There are going to be consequences for this sin, David. And so here's part of the curse. I'm going to start reading verse 9. I'll read through verse 12. It's up here. Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight? You've struck down Uriah the Hittite with a sword and taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house. You want to put a pin in that one? And I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. Narratively speaking, we get the Davidic covenant. God makes promises to David, and the very next chapter, the author shows us God blessing David, winning battles, growing the kingdom. Everything's going great. And then we have a chapter of David's sin. Right? We have David's sin with Bathsheba, the rebuke from Nathan, and then the curse, the consequences. And then now we get the chapter that's showing those consequences play out. David, you're going to have evil rise up from within your household. This chapter is beginning that. This turmoil that's taking place in David's family is part of the consequences of his sin with Bathsheba. Now think about the parallels between the two. We have David, who essentially raped Bathsheba. Took her from her home, brought her to the palace, right? Even though she was married. Amnon sought his half-sister, forced himself upon her, raped her. They both struggled. What you have the sins of the father. Then you have the son suffering from the same lust, right? We see this generational moving or transference of behavior, learned behavior, right? And so, it's scary. Right? We see how the way parents live affect their children. We see traits like this passed on. That's a whole another sermon. But in the narrative here, the author is showing us how God is operating in the life of David, how that is affecting the monarchy, and at large, how it's affecting Israel. But above all, the author of 2 Samuel here is showing God's faithfulness to his word. That would be the great positive spin of what we see. What God said is going to happen, well, it happens. He is faithful to his word. He says it's going to happen, well, it's going to happen. And that's what is happening. That is chapter 13. Do you have any thoughts or questions about chapter 13? The subject matter is pretty awful, but then again, it parallels David's account with Bathsheba so closely that we've seen it before. We just have a little bit stronger language in this chapter. All right, well, we'll pick up in chapter 14 next Wednesday night. didn't bring up, that it just dawned on me, are the what ifs. There are punishments and repercussions for that sort of behavior. Deuteronomy chapter 22, I think I've got it marked, 28. There are repercussions for this sort of situation, what is to happen. Amnon could have redeemed Tamar. If a man meets, this is Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 28, if a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. So there was a way back. It wasn't honorable by any means, but there was a way that Amnon could have redeemed Tamar. Otherwise, it would seem as if the law regarding adultery would be in effect, which is one David missed out of the consequences of, right? David, sin was forgiven by God. God said, I put your sin away. Here we have Amnon would be guilty of adultery, which the punishment was death. So what if David would have carried out the punishment for Amnon, and Absalom would have never avenged his sister's death as such? What we're going to see is Absalom is going to cause a lot of turmoil in the house of David. So had David acted as judge in this particular instance, it may have avoided a whole lot of future trouble for him. I was, and I started back up. I was just waiting for you to leave. And, yeah.